She wasn't knocking. She was pounding, both fists, barefoot on the concrete, dress soaked through, screaming a name none of us knew. I was 53 years old that night, and I had seen things that would turn most men's hair white before 40. I had buried brothers. I had stood over graves with my helmet in my hands and said nothing because there were no words left in the world. But when I opened that door and saw her face, wild eyes, belly round as the moon, blood on her feet from the gravel, something cracked open in my chest that I hadn't felt since I was a boy. Behind me, the club went quiet, and in that silence, every single man stood up. Nobody gave an order. Nobody asked a question. The thunder of 18 engines starting in the dark said everything that needed to be said. I'm 72 years old now. My knees ache when the weather changes, which in Bakersfield means they ache about 300 days a year. My right hand, the one I broke twice in circumstances I won't detail here, curls a little when I'm cold, like it's trying to remember something it'd rather forget. I sleep maybe 5 hours a night, if I'm lucky, and I spend the rest of those dark hours doing what old men do, thinking about the things that mattered. Most nights I think about that girl. I've told this story maybe a dozen times over the years. To my nephew, to a couple of younger guys at the club who were too curious for their own good. To my doctor once when she asked me, during some routine checkup, if there was anything in my life I was proud of. That caught me off guard, that question. I'd been asked a lot of things over the decades. Was I proud? I sat there on that crinkly paper on the examination table for a long moment, and then I said, yeah, one night. One night I'm proud of. She looked at me like she expected more, so I gave it to her, and now I'll give it to you. It was 1993. I was 53 years old, which felt ancient at the time, and feels like nothing at all from where I'm standing now. The chapter house was on the east side of Bakersfield, out past the rail yards, on a flat stretch of Oswald Street, where the lots were big, and the neighbors had long since learned not to care about what went on behind our fence. The building itself wasn't much. A converted warehouse, cinder block and corrugated metal, a hand-painted sign above the door that nobody outside the club needed to read. We had a bar inside, a pool table, a back room with a couch that had seen better decades, and a garage bay where Rex kept his tools, organized in a way that would make a surgeon jealous. It was late October. The valley heat had finally broken, and the nights had turned sharp and dry, the kind of cold that comes off the Sierra Nevada like a blade. I remember that specifically. I remember the cold because it matters to what comes later. I'd been president of the Bakersfield chapter for 11 years by then. 11 years of settling disputes, managing personalities, keeping the peace inside the fence while the world outside did whatever it was going to do. The men I rode with were not saints. I'll be the first to say that, and the last to apologize for it. We were rough men who had made rough choices, some of which I'd make again, and some of which I wouldn't. That's the honest accounting. But there's something that gets lost when people talk about clubs like ours. Something the movies get wrong, and the newspapers get wrong, and the politicians definitely get wrong. And it's this. The code. Not the laws of the road, though those matter. Not the bylaws or the hierarchy or the patches. I mean the thing underneath all of that. The thing that says you do not leave a man behind. You do not walk away from someone who needs. You do not let fear or inconvenience or the hour of the night be your excuse for turning your back on a human being in front of you. That code didn't come from a handbook. It came from years of men depending on each other in conditions that had no room for cowardice. It was earned, not written. That night it was tested in a way none of us expected. It was a Thursday, We'd had a full house earlier, maybe 14, 15 guys in and out throughout the evening. But by 2:30 in the morning, things had thinned out. Carl Whitmore was asleep in the back room, stretched out on that ruined couch with his boots still on, which was typical Carl. Danny Hawkes was at the bar, nursing something brown and reading a paperback western he'd already read twice. Rex Callahan was in the garage, doing what Rex always did at unreasonable hours, which was taking things apart and putting them back together. Lenny Briggs was at the pool table, playing against himself, which I'd always thought was a sign of either great focus or deep loneliness. With Lenny, it was probably both. And I was at my usual spot. There's a chair by the front window, not a comfortable chair, just a wooden thing with arms, positioned so I could see the door and the fence and the street beyond. I'd been sitting there for years, not always watching, not always thinking, sometimes just being, which is something you learn to value when you spent most of your life in motion. I had a cup of coffee gone cold on the side table. I had a legal pad I'd been writing on, some chapter business, nothing urgent. The radio was on low, some country station out of Fresno, playing old Merle Haggard, which felt right for that hour and that city. I remember looking at my watch, 2:47 a.m. I remember thinking I should wake Carl and send everyone home. Early morning, I had to be somewhere by 8. Something administrative, something I can no longer remember at all because of what happened next. Then the pounding started. Not a knock, not a tap, pounding. Both fists, rhythmic and desperate, the way you hit something when your hands have forgotten how to be polite. The whole front wall shuddered with it. I was on my feet before I knew I'd stood up. Danny's book hit the bar. Rex came out of the garage wiping his hands. Lenny's pool cue clattered against the table edge. I crossed the floor in maybe 4 seconds and pulled the door open. She was standing there in the yellow light of the single bulb above the entrance, and the first thing I saw, before her face, before anything else, was the size of her. She was enormously pregnant, 8 months at least, maybe more. The kind of pregnant where the body has reorganized itself entirely around this new fact. She was wearing a thin cotton dress, pale blue, and it was wet through with sweat or tears or both. Her feet were bare on the concrete step, and there were cuts on them, the small bleeding kind you get from gravel or broken pavement. Her hair was dark and tangled, falling across a face that was simultaneously terrified and furious, like a person who has run out of options and decided that fury is the only thing left. She looked at me, this big, bearded, gray-haired man filling a doorway at 3 in the morning, and she didn't flinch, not even a little. "Please," she said. Her voice was raw, like she'd been screaming before she got here. "Please, my husband, he collapsed. He's in the car. I can't wake him up, please." Behind me, the room had gone completely silent. I looked at her for 1 second, maybe 2, and then I stepped aside and said, "Come in." Her name was Grace Sullivan. I didn't know that yet, standing in the doorway. I learned it later, piece by piece, the way you learn things in a crisis. Not all at once, but in fragments, between the urgent parts. What I knew in that first moment was only what I could see. A young woman, heavily pregnant, barefoot and bleeding, who had knocked on the most unlikely door in Bakersfield, California, at 3 in the morning because she had nowhere else to go. I stepped back and let her in. The room felt different the instant she crossed the threshold. I can't explain it exactly. The air changed, or the light did, or maybe it was just the way every man in that room straightened up without being told to. Danny set down his glass. Rex tucked his rag into his back pocket. Lenny leaned his cue carefully against the wall, like he was afraid of making noise. Carl appeared from the back room, boots still on, rubbing his eyes, and stopped dead when he saw her. "My husband," she said again, and now that she was inside and out of the dark, I could see the full scope of her panic. Her hands were shaking, her lips were pale. There was a quality to her eyes, wide and dry, past the crying stage, that I recognize from men in bad situations. The face of someone who has already spent their fear and is running on something harder. He was driving. He just went limp. I pulled over. I can't. He won't wake up. He won't wake up, and I can't carry him, and I can't. "Where's the car?" I said. "Outside, on the street, maybe 50 yards. I looked at Lenny. Lenny Briggs had been a paramedic for 3 years before he joined the club. Left that life for reasons I won't get into here, but the knowledge didn't leave with the uniform. He was already moving before I said his name. "Lenny." "Yeah." He was already pulling on his jacket. "Rex." I looked at Rex Callahan, who was the calmest man I'd ever known in an emergency. The kind of calm that comes from having worked on engines that could kill you if you rushed. Go with him. Already going. Then I looked at the woman, at Grace, and I said, "What's your name?" She told me, and then she said, "His name is Daniel. Daniel Cooper. He's 31 years old. He has no allergies that I know of. He hasn't been sick. He just went wrong." "Okay," I said. "Come sit down." "I can't sit down. I need to be with him. My men are with him right now. The best thing you can do for Daniel is let them work and stay calm. Sit down." She sat. I think partly because her legs were going to give out anyway. Danny had already gone behind the bar and was filling a glass with water. Carl pulled a chair close to her and sat in it himself, which was Carl's way. He never loomed, never crowded. He just placed himself near people in a way that said, "I am not a threat, I am simply here." He was 61 years old and had the face of a man who had outlived most of his regrets. And in that moment, that face was exactly what was needed. "How far along?" Carl asked her, nodding at the belly. 36 weeks, she said. She took the water from Danny and drank half of it immediately. "We were driving from Fresno. We had a hospital appointment in the morning, here in Bakersfield. My mother lives here. We were going to stay with her." Her voice broke. She pressed her free hand against her mouth for a moment, eyes closed. Then she opened them again and continued, because she was that kind of person. I could already see it. "He said he had a headache. He said it wasn't bad, just a headache. And then," she stopped again, swallowed. "And then he just went sideways. I grabbed the wheel. I got us stopped. I tried to wake him up, and I couldn't, and my phone." She looked at me with an expression that was close to shame. "My phone is dead. We forgot to charge it." I know. "Don't worry about the phone," I said. "I saw your lights," she said. "I saw the light above the door. I didn't know what kind of place this was. I just saw light." She looked around the room then, really looked at it for the first time. At the bar, at the pool table, at the patches on the walls, at the 4 of us, big, rough, aged, leather-clad men who did not look like the cavalry in any movie she'd ever seen. I watched her take it all in. I watched her make a decision about it. "I don't care," she said, quietly, firmly. "I don't care who you are. Please help my husband." The door opened and Lenny came back in, moving fast. The look on his face told me everything. before he spoke. "He's breathing," Lenny said, "but it's shallow, and he's unresponsive. Pulse is there, but it's not right. Could be a cardiac event, could be a bleed. I can't tell without equipment. He needs a hospital, Mike. Not in an hour. Now." I looked at Danny. Danny was already reading my face. "Mercy Hospital," Danny said. 20 minutes if we push it." "In what?" Rex said from the doorway. "My truck's blocked in by the Hartley twins' bikes, and they're not here." "Van's got a flat," Carl said. "My truck," Danny said. "Your truck fits 2 people, Danny." "I know." For exactly 1 second, nobody moved. Then I said, "Bikes," and that was that. There was no debate. There was no hesitation. There was no man in that room who looked at another man and waited to see who would be first. Danny was off his stool. Carl was on his feet. Rex had disappeared back into the garage before I finished the word. Lenny looked at Grace and said, "Can you get back to the car? Can you walk?" "Yes," she said. "I'll ride with her in the back. She needs someone with her." "Agreed." I turned to Grace Sullivan and I looked at her straight. "We're going to put you and your husband in the back of a pickup truck, and we are going to get you to Mercy Hospital in 20 minutes. Lenny is going to stay with Daniel the entire time. I need you to trust me." She didn't even blink. "I trust you," she said. I don't know if she meant it then, or if she just said it because there was nothing else to say. It doesn't matter. We moved. Getting Daniel Cooper out of that car was not a graceful operation. He was a big man. I could see that even unconscious, even slumped sideways against the driver's door of their sedan, which Grace had managed to pull to the shoulder of Oswell Street, maybe 40 yards from our fence. 6 feet, maybe 6'1", broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that becomes a problem when it's dead weight. Rex and I got the door open and assessed the situation in the way that men who have carried injured brothers off of roads learn to do, quickly, without ceremony. "Under the arms," Rex said. "Yep." "Carl, get his legs." Carl materialized on the other side of the car without a word. We got Daniel Cooper out of that car in about 30 seconds and laid him flat on the asphalt shoulder, and Lenny was already crouched beside him, 2 fingers on the pulse point at his throat, his face doing that particular kind of concentration I'd only seen on people who were really listening to something. "Heartbeat's irregular," Lenny said. "Not crashing, but it's not happy. We need to go." Danny had pulled his truck up, a 1989 Ford F-150 that had seen better years and better paint, but ran like it was angry at the world. The bed wasn't pretty. Rex threw a tarp down, and we loaded Daniel Cooper into it as carefully as 4 big men can manage, which is to say, adequately, if not tenderly. Grace climbed in after him, bare feet and all, and Lenny got in beside her. "You stay with him," I told Lenny, through the tailgate. "I'm not going anywhere. If anything changes, I'll bang on the cab." I looked at Grace one more time. She had her husband's head in her lap, both hands on his face, and she was talking to him in a low, continuous voice, something I couldn't hear over the engine. Talking to him like he could hear her. Maybe he could. I've been told stranger things by people who've come back from the edge. I closed the tailgate. "Danny," I said. "I know," Danny said, through the open window. "I'll get them there." I nodded. Then I turned around. The others were already on their bikes. Rex, Carl, and 3 more who must have come out while we were loading Daniel. Eddie Marsh, who lived 2 blocks away and must have heard the engines turning over. Paul Dunn, who'd been asleep in his van in the lot and came out rubbing his eyes. And Tommy Greer, youngest of us at 34. who never needed a reason to ride. 7 bikes, Danny's truck, Grace and Daniel and Lenny in the back. I walked to my bike, a 1984 shovelhead that I'd been riding since Reagan was in office, that knew my weight the way a horse knows its rider, and I swung my leg over it. The engine caught on the first kick, like it always did when it mattered, like it was waiting for exactly this. For a moment, I just sat there in the dark, engine running, feeling the vibration come up through the frame, into my hands and my chest. The night was cold and absolutely clear, the kind of California October sky where the stars look like they've been freshly nailed up. Somewhere out past the rail yards, a dog was barking at nothing. I thought about what we were doing. 7 middle-aged to old men in leather, riding escort for a pregnant woman and her unconscious husband through the streets of Bakersfield at 3 in the morning. If a patrol car stopped us, it would be interesting to explain. If Daniel Cooper died in the back of that truck, the explanation would be harder. But I didn't think about those things for long. There wasn't room for them. I pulled out first. Behind me, the others fell into formation without being told. Danny's truck in the middle, bikes in front and behind and flanking. The way you protect something that matters. That's not a thing you practice. It's a thing you know. When something is worth protecting, the body just does it. Oswald Street was empty at that hour. We hit Ming Avenue and turned west, and Danny accelerated, and we accelerated with him. I pushed it to 60 on the surface street, which is not a thing I normally endorse, but Normal had gone home hours ago. Rex pulled up alongside me, and I could see his face in my mirror, set hard, eyes forward, the face of a man who has decided something. The city slid past us in fragments, a gas station, a closed diner, a church with a parking lot full of shadows, a stretch of warehouses with their loading docks pulled down and dark. There was almost no other traffic. Once a sedan coming the other way flashed its headlights at us, startled by the procession. Once a traffic light went red and Danny slowed, and I thought, "Don't stop, Danny, don't stop." And then Danny thought the same thing and didn't stop. And none of us stopped, and the intersection fell away behind us. I found myself thinking about a night 20 years earlier, riding escort for a brother whose bike had blown up on the I-5 outside Stockton. Different situation, same formation, same feeling in the chest. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, a high-wire feeling. The sense of the moment mattering in a way that most moments simply don't. Halfway there, Lenny banged on the cab. My stomach dropped. Danny's brake lights came on for a half second. A question. I pulled alongside the driver window. "What is it?" Danny said. I turned and looked through the rear window. Lenny was leaning over Daniel, fingers back on his neck, his face unreadable in the dark. Grace had both her hands pressed together against her mouth, watching Lenny work. Then Lenny looked up, saw me looking, and held up one hand, fingers spread. 5 minutes. He needed 5 minutes, and he needed us moving. I looked at Danny. Danny looked at me. "Go," I said. Danny went. I have ridden fast in my life. I have ridden roads in conditions that would make a sensible man take the bus. But that stretch of Ming Avenue, those 5 minutes, those might be the fastest I have ever gone through a city street. And the strangest thing is that I remember it as almost silent, the wind and the engine and nothing else. The city become a blur. All of it collapsed into the single tunnel vision purpose of getting that man to a hospital before his heart decided to stop cooperating. We came off Ming onto Real Road, and the hospital was a quarter-mile ahead, its lights enormous and white against the dark sky. Danny hit the horn, one long blast, as we turned into the emergency entrance, and by the time he braked, there were already people coming through the doors. 11 minutes. I found out later that the drive was supposed to take 20. Mercy Hospital's emergency entrance at 3 in the morning is its own particular kind of whirl. Fluorescent light that has no relationship to time. The smell of disinfectant and old coffee, and the particular anxious sweat of people waiting for news. A television bolted to the wall showing something with the sound off. Chairs bolted to the floor in rows, occupied by a scattered collection of people in various stages of worry, each one sealed inside their own private emergency. We did not blend in. 7 men in Hell's Angels leathers filling the waiting room of Mercy Hospital is not a subtle thing. I'm aware of that. I was aware of it then, watching the waiting room rearrange itself at our arrival. A mother pulling her child closer. A man in a business suit finding a reason to look at his shoes. A nurse at the triage desk going very still for a moment before deciding on professionalism. I walked up to the desk. "The man they just brought in from the truck outside," I said. "His name is Daniel Cooper, 31 years old, no known allergies. He was unresponsive when we found him. My man Leonard Briggs, former EMT, 3 years, rode with him and can give you a full rundown of what he observed. The nurse, young woman, steady eyes, the kind of competent that doesn't need to perform itself, nodded once and picked up her phone. Is his wife with him? She's the pregnant woman, about 36 weeks. She's been under significant stress tonight. I'd appreciate it if someone checked on her too." "We will. Thank you." That was the full extent of my authority in that building. I had gotten them there. Everything from this point belonged to other people. People with degrees and equipment and the specific knowledge of how to keep a man's heart working. I turned around and went to sit down. The others had spread out across the waiting room with that particular discipline of men who know how to take up space without taking over space. Danny had found a corner and was examining the middle distance. Rex was sitting with his forearms on his knees, patient as stone. Carl had found a cup of bad coffee from somewhere and was holding it with both hands like it was something precious. Eddie and Paul were quiet. Tommy Greer, the youngest, was the only one whose leg was bouncing. I sat down next to Danny. For a while we didn't speak. "You think he makes it?" Danny said finally. "I don't know." "What do you think it was?" Lenny thought maybe a bleed. Cardiac, possibly. I paused. "He's 31 years old, Danny." "Yeah, 31-year-olds aren't supposed to." "I know." We went quiet again. On the muted television, someone was laughing at something. About 40 minutes in, a woman in scrubs came out and asked for the family of Daniel Cooper. And a moment later, Grace Sullivan appeared from somewhere deeper in the hospital. They must have let her come out to a waiting area closer to the treatment rooms. She looked diminished under the fluorescent light, if that's possible for a woman at 36 weeks. Smaller. The adrenaline had metabolized and left something exhausted and very young in its wake. The woman in scrubs spoke to her in a low voice for about 2 minutes. I watched Grace's face do several things during those 2 minutes. Contract, release, contract again, and then go very still at the end, with an expression I've seen on people who have just been handed a weight they don't yet know if they can carry. The woman in scrubs left. Grace stood there alone for a moment. Then she turned and looked at us, all of us, across the waiting room. She crossed the room. She walked straight to where I was sitting and stopped in front of me, and I stood up because that seemed like the right thing to do. And she looked at me for a moment with those green eyes that were full of something I couldn't name. And then she said, in a very quiet voice, "They say he had a brain aneurysm. It ruptured while he was driving. They say if he hadn't gotten here when he did," she stopped, started again. "They say the next 30 minutes are going to tell them a lot, but that the fact that he's here, responsive to stimuli now, that it's," another stop, "that it's a very good sign." She looked at me. 11 minutes, I said. She blinked. "What?" "From our door to this one. 11 minutes. Her face changed completely then. I don't have the right words for what it did. I'm a man who has spent 50 years trying to be precise about mechanical things, and I have never been precise about faces. But whatever it did, it was real, and it was the truest thing I'd seen in a long time. She sat down in the chair beside me, not the one I'd been sitting in, just the adjacent one, like she needed to be near something solid. And we sat there together, this 28-year-old woman and this 53-year-old man who had nothing in common except the last 90 minutes of their lives. And neither of us said anything for a while. After a bit she said, "I saw the sign on your door. I knew what it was. I've seen the news stories. I've heard the things people say." She paused. I knocked anyway. "I know," I said. "I didn't have anywhere else. I know. I want you to understand that I wasn't being naive. I knew what I was walking toward. I just decided it didn't matter." She looked at her hands, which were folded on top of her belly. "He was dying in the car, and you had a light on." I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say to it. Around 4:30 in the morning, a doctor came out, Dr. Patricia Howe. She introduced herself. 50s, silver hair cut short, the kind of face that has delivered too much news of both kinds to show much of either anymore. She asked for Grace, and I stood up reflexively and then caught myself and looked at Grace, who looked at me and said, "Stay." I stayed. Dr. Howe told us that Daniel Cooper had survived the rupture, that the surgery had gone as well as it could have gone, that he was in intensive care and would remain there, and that the road ahead was uncertain and long, but that the fact of his being alive, the simple, stubborn fact of it, was something they had not entirely expected when he came through the doors. Whoever got him here when they did, Dr. Howe said, looking between Grace and me, made a very significant difference. Grace didn't look at me. She was looking at her hands again, but she reached over, without looking, and put her hand on top of mine, where it rested on the arm of the chair, just for a moment, just a second or two. Then she took it back, and neither of us acknowledged it, and that was fine. That was exactly right. I looked across the waiting room at my men. Danny with his book, long since forgotten. Rex with his cold coffee. Carl half asleep in his chair. Eddie and Paul and Tommy in their various postures of patience. And I thought about the code. The thing underneath all the noise and the reputation and the decades of history. You do not leave someone who needs. It had cost us nothing. A night's sleep, some fuel, a traffic light ignored. In exchange, a man was alive who had been dying. A child would be born to a father. A woman would not spend the rest of her life with a particular empty shape beside her. That's the accounting. That's the whole of it. And it strikes me, sitting here at 72, with my bad hand and my aching knees and the long backward view of a life, that it's the only accounting that has ever made complete sense to me. Danny caught my eye from across the room. He raised his cold coffee cup in a small gesture. Not quite a toast, not quite a salute, something in between. I nodded back. Outside, the sky was beginning to do the thing it does before dawn. That particular dark blue that isn't night anymore, but isn't light either. The city was still quiet. In a few hours, it would fill up with people going to work, going to school, going to their appointments and their obligations and their ordinary Thursdays. None of them would know what had happened on Oswald Street and Ming Avenue and Real Road in the hours before their alarm clocks went off. That was fine. That was exactly fine. Some things don't need witnesses to count. Daniel Cooper spent 19 days in the ICU at Mercy Hospital. He came home on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November in a car driven by Grace's mother, a sturdy woman named Helen, who I never met, but who I've thought about sometimes, pictured arriving at the hospital the morning after, walking into a situation she must have been told about on the phone in fragments, trying to absorb it all. Grace called the chapter from the hospital. She'd asked for our number from the admitting nurse, who apparently had memorized it, which says something about Bakersfield in 1993, and left a message on the machine. I still have that message. I mean that literally. I still have it. At some point, somebody transferred it from the tape to a cassette, and then eventually to a digital file, because I asked them to, because I am a sentimental old man, which is something I would have denied vigorously at 53. Her voice on that message is tired and full and whole, in a way that voices get when the worst is past and the relief is still new. She said, "Daniel is going home today. I wanted you to know. I wanted you all to know. I don't have the right words. I'm not sure there are right words. But I want you to know. That's all. 30 seconds. I have listened to it maybe 30 times over the years. Not out of sentimentality exactly, or maybe exactly out of sentimentality, since I've just admitted to being that kind of man now. I listen to it because it is a document. It is evidence of a thing that happened. In a life that has not always produced clean evidence of doing right, it matters to have a document. Their daughter was born on November 28, 1993, Thanksgiving Day. Grace called again with that news. I wasn't there for that call. Danny took it. And I heard later that she said the baby weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces, and that Daniel had been present for the birth, which the doctors had initially said might not be possible. They named her Elena. I never met Elena. I've never met Grace or Daniel again after that night in the hospital waiting room, which is how these things sometimes go. People pass through each other's lives at the points of highest intensity and then return to their separate orbits, carrying the shared thing privately. I have no picture of any of them. I don't know where they are now, whether Daniel fully recovered, whether Elena grew up to be the kind of person who knows the story of her birth night. Maybe she does. Maybe Grace told her. Maybe on some ordinary evening, Grace sat down with her daughter and said, "The night your father nearly died, I knocked on a door I had no reason to knock on, and the men who opened it saved his life." I hope she told her. I think she probably did. What I know and what I've thought about across the 30 years since that October night is what it meant for the men who were there. Danny Hawks died in 2009. Heart attack. Fast and clean, which was the way Danny would have wanted it if you'd asked him. At his memorial, I talked about that night, the way he didn't ask a single question, didn't hesitate for a single second, just got off his stool and started moving. That was Danny in total, his whole character in one motion. Rex Callahan is still alive, 80 years old now, living in Arizona, and I talk to him maybe twice a year. His hands shake a little now, which he finds insulting, because his hands were always his instrument. But his mind is sharp and his memory is sharp, and he remembers that night the same way I do, as something that happened without deliberation, the way breathing happens, the way catching something happens when it's falling. Carl Whitmore passed in 2014. Cancer, which was a lousy way for a man like Carl to go. But cancer doesn't consult with you about your preferences. His daughter spoke at the service, and she talked about her father's gentleness, his capacity to be still with people in the worst moments, his way of just placing himself near someone who needed something without making it about himself. I thought about the way he sat down in that chair next to Grace, not crowding her, not performing concern, just being there. That was Carl's genius, and it always was. Lenny Briggs eventually went back to emergency medicine, did it for another 18 years, retired in 2011, and lives in Fresno now, which is not far from Bakersfield in miles, but is a different world in other ways. I see him occasionally. We don't talk about that night much, not because it's painful, but because we don't need to. Some things are understood between people in a way that talking about them would only diminish. The younger men, Eddie, Paul, Tommy, went their separate ways over the years, as men do. I've lost track of some of them. I hope they're okay. I hope they carry that night somewhere useful, somewhere it does something for them when they need it. As for me, I am 72 years old. I live in a house on the north side of Bakersfield, a good-sized house for one person, which is what I've been for the last 12 years, since my partner Margaret decided that she had given enough of herself to a man who loved the road more than most things. She wasn't wrong. We're still on speaking terms, which is more than a lot of people get. My nephew visits when he can, which is not as often as either of us would like. My knees hurt, my hand curls. I sleep 5 hours and spend the rest of the dark hours thinking. I'm not a member of the club anymore, haven't been for 7 years, when age made certain things impractical and I had to be honest with myself about it. But I still ride. I still keep the shovel head, which is something of a miracle in itself, and I take it out when the weather is reasonable and there's somewhere worth going. The roads around Bakersfield are not beautiful, exactly, but they are large and honest, and I understand them the way I understand very few other things. People ask me sometimes, younger people who grew up with a certain idea about who and what the Hells Angels were, whether I regret it, the life, the choices, the years spent on the far side of respectability. And I tell them the truth, which is that regret is a complicated instrument, and I try not to use it crudely. There are specific things I would do differently. There are specific nights I would unmake if I could. But the broad shape of it, the code, the loyalty, the belonging, the willingness to be present for people in the dark hours, I don't regret any of that. I think about the night Grace Sullivan knocked on our door. I think about what would have happened if we hadn't been there. If the chapter house had been dark that night, if there had been no light burning above the door, if she had run past us to the next lit window, which might have been a mile away or two, out there in the East Bakersfield flatness at 3 in the morning. I think about Daniel in the car, the aneurysm doing its quiet, catastrophic work. 11 minutes being the difference between a man who comes home to his daughter in November and a man who doesn't. I think about what it cost us. Nothing. It cost us nothing that mattered. A lost night's sleep, some gas, a few hours in a waiting room with bad coffee and a muted television. And I think about the idea that gets lost in every version of this story that I've heard told by people who weren't there. The idea that what we did was unusual, extraordinary. The interesting story of the tough guys who turned out to have hearts. But that's not the story. The story is simpler than that, and harder than that, and more important than that. The story is this: a person needed help, and we were there, and we helped. That's the whole of it. Everything else, the leather, the patches, the reputation, the mythology, all of that is just costume. Underneath the costume is the thing that was always there. Men who had learned through long and sometimes brutal experience that you do not walk away from someone who needs you. You do not calculate the cost first. You do not wonder whether they deserve it, or whether it's your problem, or whether there's someone better suited to handle it. You open the door, you get on the bike, you go. I learned that from men who are mostly gone now. I have tried in the time since to be a vessel for it, to pass it forward in whatever ways were available to me. I have not always succeeded. I am not a good man in the tidy, uncomplicated way that word implies. But I have tried to be, when it mattered, a present one. Grace Sullivan knocked on our door because we had a light on. That's all. She didn't know who we were. She didn't know what we'd done, or what we were capable of, or what the patches on our backs meant to the larger world. She saw a light in the dark, and she ran toward it. And that, I think, is the true version of the story. Not what we did, what she did. Walking up to a door she had every reason to be afraid of, and knocking on it anyway, because the alternative was unacceptable, because her husband was in the car, and she had no options left, and the light was on, and so she knocked. That kind of courage, the desperate, no other choice, bare feet on the pavement kind, is not the kind they write songs about. It doesn't look like bravery from the outside. It looks like a young pregnant woman pounding on a door at 3 in the morning. But I have seen men flinch at much less. I have seen men calculate and delay and find excuses when the cost was even lower and the need was even clearer. She didn't flinch. She knocked. And because she knocked, her daughter grew up with a father. Because she knocked, I have a document on my computer that I listen to sometimes in the dark hours before dawn. A 30-second message in a tired and whole voice. 30 years old now, and still the cleanest evidence I have that on at least one night, in at least one specific way, we got it right. My knees hurt. The sky is doing that blue thing again, the not night, not morning thing. In a few hours, Bakersfield will fill up with people who don't know that story. That's fine. That's exactly fine. I know it. The men who were there know it. And somewhere in California, or wherever they are now, Grace and Daniel and Elena, 30 years down the road, they know it too. That's enough. That's more than enough. It always was. Guys, I want to end this video by saying something from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being here with me. I mean it. Every view, every like, every comment, all of this means so much more than you can imagine. I know your time is precious, and the fact that you choose to spend a few minutes here watching what I create motivates me to keep giving my best every day. If this video touched you in any way, let me know here in the comments. I read everything. And often it's your words that give me the strength and inspiration for the next video. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel and become part of this community that's growing with so much love. And if you can, share this video with someone who also needs to hear this message. I am immensely grateful for each and every one of you. See you in the next video.